Have you ever looked at a map of the world and wondered how people separated by an entire ocean ended up sharing the same boat designs, the same words, the same crops? Because that question keeps haunting archaeologists. And the answer might shock you. Let me take you somewhere unexpected. Not Manila, not Cebu, Africa. Specifically, the island of Madagascar, sitting off the southeastern coast of the African continent, roughly 8,000 kilometers from the Philippine archipelago. On that island, researchers have documented outrigger canoes, double outrigger canoes. The design mirrors vessels found across Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. Same stabilizing floats, same hull construction philosophy, same relationship between the main body of the boat and its lateral supports. How did watercraft technology from the Western Pacific end up on an island next to Mozambique? That question has been nagging scholars for over a century. The implications are staggering. We're not talking about a coincidence in shape. We're talking about a shared maritime tradition that stretches across the Indian Ocean, connecting Austronesian-speaking peoples from island Southeast Asia to the shores of East Africa. This changes how we think about ancient Filipinos. It changes how we think about seafaring itself. Now, some people hear this and immediately push back. Fair enough. Let's look at both sides of this debate with clear eyes, because the evidence deserves careful treatment, and so does the skepticism. The story has layers that most popular retellings skip over, and those layers matter. Really matter. They matter a lot. One overlooked detail about the genetic evidence connecting Madagascar to Southeast Asia opens a door that most historians walked right past for decades, and understanding it requires us to rewind about 2,000 years. Around 2,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Austronesian sailors, people whose ancestral homeland traces back to Taiwan and the Philippines, undertook voyages across the Indian Ocean. This wasn't a single dramatic expedition. Linguistic and genetic studies suggest waves of migration and contact over centuries. The Malagasy language, spoken on Madagascar today, belongs to the Austronesian language family, not the Bantu family, not Arabic. Austronesian, the closest linguistic relative? Researchers from multiple institutions, including work published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, have identified strong connections to languages spoken in Borneo, particularly the Maanyan language of southern Kalimantan. The Philippine connection sits within this broader Austronesian web. Ancient Filipino seafarers were part of a maritime civilization that stretched from Madagascar to Rapa Nui, from New Zealand to Hawaii. The Balangay, a plank-built boat excavated in Butuan, Philippines, carbon-dated to around 320 CE, demonstrates the sophistication of these vessels. They weren't crude rafts. They were engineered for open ocean travel. Stop right there. Think about what that means. People with no GPS, no compass, no satellite weather data cross thousands of kilometers of open water. Repeatedly. Successfully enough to establish permanent settlements and leave a genetic footprint that persists to this day. DNA studies have strengthened the connection. Research published in journals like Nature and the American Journal of Human Genetics has found that a significant portion of the Malagasy population carries Austronesian genetic markers alongside Bantu African markers. Mitochondrial DNA analysis points to Southeast Asian maternal lineages. The mixing of these two populations, Austronesian voyagers and East African peoples, produced the unique Malagasy culture we see today. Rice cultivation on Madagascar didn't come from mainland Africa. It came across the ocean, carried by people who already knew how to grow it. Banana cultivation, too, followed Austronesian pathways into Africa. The crops tell the same story the genes tell. The boats tell the same story the crops tell. Everything converges. So why does anyone argue against this narrative? The objections aren't foolish. Some scholars caution against overstating the Philippine connection specifically. The Austronesian expansion was enormous, spanning thousands of islands and countless distinct cultures. Pinning the Madagascar migration specifically on Filipino sailors requires care, because the modern nation-state of the Philippines didn't exist 2,000 years ago. The people who sailed were Austronesian, broadly. Their descendants became Filipinos, Indonesians, Malaysians, Polynesians, Micronesians, and Malagasy. Claiming them exclusively as Filipino risks projecting modern national identity backward onto people who had entirely different concepts of belonging. That's a legitimate concern. Scholars like those at the Australian National University have emphasized this distinction between Austronesian identity and any single modern national identity. There's another counterargument worth hearing. Some researchers suggest the outrigger canoe designs found on Madagascar could reflect convergent evolution, different cultures independently arriving at similar solutions to similar engineering problems. Water behaves the same everywhere. Stability problems on the open ocean are universal. Could two unconnected groups invent outriggers separately? Theoretically, yes. Practically, though, when you combine the boat designs with the linguistic evidence, the genetic data, the crop transfers, and the archaeological record, convergent evolution becomes a very hard sell. The weight of evidence overwhelmingly favors direct contact and migration. Still, honest scholarship demands we mention the alternative hypothesis, even if most experts now consider it insufficient to explain the full pattern. What you might not expect is how this ancient migration debate has spilled out of academic journals and into something far more explosive: modern cultural identity politics across Southeast Asia. This story matters beyond archaeology. Oh, it matters deeply. For Filipinos especially, the Austronesian seafaring narrative has become a source of immense cultural pride. Pre-colonial Philippine civilization wasn't a backwater waiting to be discovered by Magellan. It was part of a vast maritime network. The Balangay boats of Butuan prove that complex watercraft construction existed in the Philippines centuries before European contact. You know, the Laguna copperplate inscription, dated to 900 CE, shows a literate, trade-connected society with links to the Javanese Metang Kingdom. These aren't peripheral footnotes. They represent a civilization with deep roots. Wild, right? The rediscovery of this seafaring heritage has fueled a cultural renaissance. Filipino historians and public intellectuals have pushed to include more pre-colonial history in school curricula. The Balangay Voyage project, which built replicas of ancient boats and sailed them across Southeast Asian waters, captured public imagination. Social media communities dedicated to pre-colonial Filipino culture have exploded in size. Tattoo traditions documented by early Spanish colonizers are being revived. Really revived. The Baybayin script appears on merchandise, artwork, and government logos. Something cracked open. A hunger for identity that colonialism tried to bury. Fans of this history, and I use the word fans deliberately because this has become a cultural movement, not a dry academic subject, have created an entire ecosystem of content. YouTube channels, podcasts, illustrated books, graphic novels reimagining Austronesian voyages. The enthusiasm borders on devotion. Some creators have built followings of hundreds of thousands by exploring pre-colonial myths, social structures, and maritime technology. The ancient Filipino seafarer has become an archetype, a symbol. The idea that your ancestors didn't cower on shorelines but conquered oceans, that hits different when your national story has been filtered through centuries of colonial framing. Spain told one version, America told another. The archaeological record tells a third, and that third version is resonating. Here's where it gets complicated, though. The same pride that fuels cultural recovery can also fuel distortion. Not every claim circulating online about pre-colonial Filipino achievements is supported by evidence. Some social media posts exaggerate the scope of Austronesian voyages, claiming direct Filipino colonization of Africa rather than the more nuanced reality of broad Austronesian migration with deep Philippine connections. Others conflate different time periods, mixing up evidence from 2,000 years ago with events from 500 years ago. Responsible historians within the Filipino community itself have raised alarms about mythologizing. The real history doesn't need embellishment. It's already extraordinary. A balangay that sailed the open ocean is impressive enough without inventing a fleet of 1,000 warships. The danger of overclaiming is that it gives critics ammunition to dismiss the entire narrative, including the parts that are rock solid. The cultural impact of this history depends on treating the evidence with respect, not bending it into nationalist mythology. That tension between pride and accuracy, it hasn't been resolved. The way different communities handle that tension reveals something surprising about how ancient history functions in the age of viral content. The global impact extends beyond Filipino communities. The Austronesian expansion story has forced a rethinking of maritime history worldwide. For decades, European age of exploration narratives dominated. Columbus, Magellan, Vasco da Gama. These were presented as the pinnacle of human seafaring achievement. The Austronesian evidence demolishes that framework. Thousands of years before any Portuguese caravel left Lisbon, Austronesian peoples had already crossed the largest ocean on Earth. They had colonized islands from Madagascar to Easter Island, a span covering more than half the planet's circumference. No European maritime culture achieved anything comparable in geographic scope before the 15th century. This reframing has entered academic discourse. Textbooks are being revised. Museums are updating exhibits. The Smithsonian has featured Austronesian maritime heritage. Maritime archaeology programs in Southeast Asia have received increased funding and attention. The Philippines itself has invested in underwater archaeology, with sites like Butuan yielding ongoing discoveries. Fan theories have emerged around the edges. Some enthusiasts speculate about Austronesian contact with South America, pointing to the sweet potato, a crop native to the Americas that was present in Polynesia before European contact. Genetic studies of the sweet potato suggest it was transferred to Oceania through human contact, possibly around 1000 CE. If true, Austronesian sailors reached the Americas centuries before Columbus. That hypothesis remains debated, but it's taken seriously by researchers. The possibility alone is electrifying. It suggests the Austronesian seafaring network was even larger than currently documented. Imitators have followed. Other cultures have launched projects exploring their own ancient maritime heritage, inspired partly by the Austronesian example. Experimental archaeology, building replica boats and sailing them on historical routes, has grown as a field. The Jewel of Muscat project reconstructed an ancient Arab dhow. Thor Heyerdahl's earlier Kon-Tiki expedition attempted to prove Polynesian migration theories using a balsa raft. The Filipino balangay replicas fit within this tradition, but carry a distinct emotional charge. They're not academic exercises alone, they're acts of cultural reclamation. Sailors aboard those replica vessels have described the experience as spiritual, ancestral, connecting with something older than memory. Moving on. The work begins to live its own life at this point. The archaeological findings generate cultural movements. The cultural movements generate new interest in archaeology. Funding follows attention. Attention follows stories. Stories follow discoveries. A feedback loop. The ancient boats found in Africa aren't passive artifacts sitting in museum cases. They're active agents in a living conversation about identity, capability, and belonging. Every time someone in Manila or Davao or Chicago or Dubai sees the Austronesian migration map and feels something stir, recognition, pride, wonder, those boats are still sailing, still carrying meaning across impossible distances. So where do I land in this debate? Here's my honest assessment. The evidence for Austronesian migration from Southeast Asia to Madagascar is overwhelming. Linguistic, genetic, archaeological, and botanical data all align. The Philippine connection within that broader Austronesian story is real and significant, even if we should be careful about applying modern national labels to ancient peoples. The cultural impact of this rediscovery has been largely positive. It's returned agency and dignity to pre-colonial histories that were marginalized under European frameworks. The risks of exaggeration exist, and honest voices within the Filipino community are right to insist on factual rigor. Pride built on truth endures. Pride built on invention collapses. The truth here is extraordinary enough. Remember that question at the beginning? How did people separated by an entire ocean end up sharing the same boats, the same words, the same crops? The answer isn't mysterious. It isn't supernatural. It's human. Thousands of years ago, people who lived on islands in what we now call the Philippines looked at the horizon and decided to cross it. They built boats, they read stars, they carried rice and knowledge and language with them. They sailed 8,000 kilometers. They arrived, they stayed, they mixed with local populations. They created something new. And when we find their boats on the shores of Africa, we're not uncovering a secret. We're remembering a truth that was always there, waiting for us to be brave enough to look.